Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here with Roger Stone. And Roger, it's a great honor to be actually talking to you.
Thank you. I'm glad to be with you again. It's been quite a while.
It has. It's been like 2.5 years. I think we met at the Reawakening tour with Clay Clark. Is that true?
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, we're in the green room, and I called you my favorite swamp creature, and you said you're no longer a swamp creature anymore, which I appreciate that. I wanted to first start out with, how did you first start out in politics? I don't hear a lot of people ask me those questions. How old were you, and what inspired you to do what you do?
I was 12 years old when I first got an interest in politics. I read a book that inspired me called Conscience of a Conservative by Senator Barry Goldwater. This was roughly 1963 when he was going through the process of being drafted to run for president. Goldwater never wanted to run for president, but as the head of the nascent conservative movement, he was essentially drafted by his supporters. And I became a Goldwater zealot. This is when I first knew I was a conservative, and I identified with his themes of self-reliance, privacy, small government, anti-communism, certainly, a strong national defense, but peace through strength, rather than the latter view of the neocons who seem to go around the world looking for wars to get into. And then after Goldwater lost, I was, of course, crushed. When you're 12 years old, you don't have much of a realistic view of politics. But I began to study the 1960 election, and I realized that Richard Nixon, vice president for 8 years under Dwight Eisenhower, had been robbed of the 1960 election. He'd made some mistakes in that campaign, but nonetheless, I think he closed fast and he actually won that race. I think it was stolen from him through voter fraud. I wrote 2 books on this subject, Nixon's Secrets, but even better, my book, Tricky Dick, The Rise and Fall and Rise of Richard M. Nixon. And therefore, I wrote a letter to Nixon, then in exile, practicing law in New York City. Told him if he ever plotted a political comeback, I wanted in 1968, 67 really, they contacted me. I signed up. And then Nixon, of course, was elected. I went to Washington, D.C. to college, working in the Nixon White House in the beginning at night, but then ultimately left college to go full time in the president's reelection. The relationships I built while working for Nixon allowed me to be hired by Governor Ronald Reagan in 1976. Nixon and Reagan were from the same Southern California political milieu. They had many common donors, very common staffers, common supporters. And then I worked for Reagan, of course, in 76, again in 1980, again for his reelection in 1984. It was in 1980 that I met Donald Trump. And I was probably one of the first people in the country to recognize that Trump had the size, I don't mean the physical size, but the stature, the toughness, the resilience, the big picture view to be not only a great presidential candidate, but also be, well, a truly great president.
And he's proven that. He's proven that.
And he's proven that. So that's kind of the short version of my campaign resume. Now, I managed my first campaign for the state senate in 1966 in a very wealthy suburban Republican district in Fairfield County, Connecticut, for a guy named John Lupton. And I still say that it was in that campaign that I learned more than any place else in my political experience.
Well, it's amazing that you started so young and that you were actually evaluating that. My daughter, Rachel, who's 17, she doesn't want me to come out with her political aspirations because she thinks I'm going to compromise her. She's already thinking that way. She's 17. But I'm very proud to say that she feels politically inclined to do social change similar to what you've done. And it's amazing to me that, I mean, I was 2 years old when you were talking about starting out and how long you've been involved in it and the energy you still have in what you do. You're always online. You're always doing interviews. It's a great honor to be talking to you like this. But what do you attribute? I mean, if everybody was like you with their point of views, like get involved, it would be a different world. What triggered that at 12 years old to go, I'm going to evaluate this. I'm going to get involved about him stealing the election.
It's a very difficult question. I mean, I remain in politics and active in politics because I love my country, and I love the freedom that we're enjoying right now by doing this interview.
Yes,
Uh, and I see a very serious danger to our constitutionally guaranteed freedoms from the current Democratic Party. It was not always like this. There was a time in America when both parties were patriotic, both parties supported capitalism, both parties were anti-communist, both parties supported a strong national defense. Uh, both parties believed in the U.S. Constitution. I don't think that's true anymore. I think
I
the
agree.
the traditional Democratic Party of John F. Kennedy and Harry Truman, that has been supplanted by a Marxist clique that has taken over that party. And you see the results, open borders, the pushing of transgenderism,
Yeah, I know.
the spending and taxation beyond all comprehension, the migrant invasion.
We did a recent interview with a gentleman that actually knows of illegal migrants that come in across the border and have been legalized within 4 months. They've got a social security number. They've got housing that's funded by the government. They're getting their driver's license, and they're getting. I'm sure they're going to vote because their family members and them are basically being supported by the Biden administration coming over. I don't believe that it's out of control. I believe it's in control by the Democratic Party, and it's an intentional way to get more votes, maybe 10 million or more, because we've got 64 million people illegal in our country already. What do you think?
Well, you've already seen them hinting about this when Secretary of State Blinken had his meeting with the president of Mexico. Immediately afterward, he hinted about the possibility of making all those who are in the country here illegally U.S. citizens. That's for the purposes of having them vote. When the mayor of Chicago had a press conference 2 weeks ago, and he said that we can't sustain the spending, the social services spending for all these migrants is going to destroy us. Perhaps the answer is to make them all citizens. Well, first of all, I don't see how that will address the question. But secondarily, if you say what you just said, that this is an effort to expand the electorate and to stack it with illegals, you're immediately called racist. That's racist. No, I think it's realistic. It's exactly what they have planned. If Hillary Clinton had been elected president, and if they had retained both houses of Congress, I think they intended to do it then, to legalize those who were here illegally then. They still hope to do it if Joe Biden is reelected. I think that's their first move. Now they cement a permanent majority into our electorate. Uh, as you know, more illegals entered the country in the last year than mothers giving birth, mothers who are American citizens giving birth. That's an extraordinary statistic.
Yeah, 8.5 million about approximately right now.
Yeah, I mean, it boggles the mind.
It does. Okay. Okay, so we talked about the election. Let's talk about Michelle Obama. Now, I understand. Tell me if I'm correct. I think I saw a video of you saying that Michelle Obama is going to be installed and Biden's going to step out. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. I stand by my prediction. Now, the way it actually unfolds will not be that direct. In other words, if anything, the last 24 to 48 hours, actually the last 72 hours, have demonstrated to us the inherent weakness of Joe Biden. Now you have his own Justice Department, even though he's trying to somehow blame Donald Trump and the Republicans, which is absurd.
Of
His
course.
own Justice Department, a special counsel appointed by his Attorney General, has concluded that he is in a deteriorating situation. So much so, they say, that he couldn't possibly stand trial, even though, yes, he did break the law. He did willfully retain documents in violation of law, documents that he was never entitled to keep because these are from his time as vice president and U.S. senator. I think, I don't know how you get over that. He can't have it both ways. He can't, on the one hand, say, well, he can't be prosecuted because he's slipping mentally, but he should be reelected president because he isn't slipping mentally. Well, which is it? So I think it's only a matter of time before those who are really in control of the Democratic Party, to the extent that anyone's in control, if they haven't already recognized that Joe is unelectable, which I believe they haven't realized that, they certainly will. And I think it's the trifecta. It is the impact of his cognitive decline, which has now been memorialized by his Justice Department, combined with the impact of his disastrous policies, take your pick, inflation, border security, and so on, and the burgeoning scandal that's still surrounding the epic corruption of his son and his brother and himself, and others in the Biden crime family. So the combination of those make him utterly unelectable. He's a very, very stubborn guy. That's perhaps his most obvious, I would call it a quality, but in this case, a trait. Let's call it a trait. And he's not, and he loves the job, and his wife loves the job. And when he said in his angry press conference, "I'm the best qualified person in the United States to be president," he really believes that. When he said, "Who could do what I've done?" He actually thinks he's doing a good job. The voters don't seem to agree with that. He has the lowest approval ratings of any president in recent times. But
Worse than Carter, right?
Worse than Carter. I
Yeah.
do think that he's going to resist the movement to replace him, but in the end, uh, they've cleared the field in the Democratic nominating process, so he is going to roll up enough delegates to get nominated. But I think ultimately, while I don't think he resigns, I think he fulfills the term, perhaps. I think he will ultimately announce that he's not running again, maybe just before the convention. It would be at that time that he could release his delegates, and the Democratic National Convention could insist upon, could demand, could draft the most popular Democrat in the country. That would be Michelle Obama. Her husband is, of course, not eligible to run for another term, having served 2 terms. I still believe that that is what's going to transpire. Now, there is a more draconian path, which is if Joe refuses to step aside, well, I really think they could conceivably remove him from office under the 25th Amendment. Under the 25th Amendment, if a majority of the cabinet plus the sitting vice president, Kamala Harris, are in agreement, Joe would be removed from office. That would make Kamala Harris, at least temporarily, president through the end of the term. You have to presume that she probably wants to run. We have to suspect that. On the other hand, she's no stronger as a candidate than Joe. She may, in fact, be weaker. So it's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out.
Yeah, I totally agree with you about being weaker. And it's another thing where the Democrats can claim that they've had the first woman president. You know, that's another thing, another reason that I would think they'd have Joe step out just to claim that. But I can't even imagine her running. I mean, I don't know the lesser of the two evils with Michelle or Kamala. I mean, it's this is just so shocking to me that people like this. I mean, they've got to have some kind of IQ to be able to get where they've gotten to. How do you explain the the total lack of professionalism, the whole total lack of professionalism that they do with, Camilla can barely, she does the word, is it the word salads? And Joe can't put two sentences together. Why do you think that we're dealing with this in this day and age?
Well, there was a very interesting book published 10 days ago in which it was said that Biden didn't really want Kamala Harris for vice president. He was very upset that in the debates, she correctly branded him as a racist for his advocacy of the 1994 crime bill, which
Strom
is when
Thurmond.
we get the harsh mandatory penalties for the first time nonviolent crime of possession of small amounts of drugs, which has been used disproportionately to incarcerate hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Black people. So he didn't want her. Evidently, it was Barack Obama who insisted on putting her on the ticket. Also, there was speculation, this was before the most recent developments, that that Biden wanted to replace her now with Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. How ironic it would be if it is Kamala who now ends up replacing Joe, which I still think is a very real possibility.
You think it's a real possibility?
Well, I mean, his cognitive decline is just obvious for everybody to see. He didn't help himself in his angry press conference where he said, "There's nothing wrong with my memory. I have how dare they ask me about the death of my son?" Well, he uses the death of his son constantly
I know.
in his political communications. He's always raising it. He's the one raising it. He also can't seem to remember how his son died. His son did not die in Afghanistan in military service. His son died when he was the Attorney General of Delaware of a brain tumor. God rest his soul. But he said, I wear this rosary. I've worn this rosary every day since my son's death, and it was given to me by the people at Our Lady of
Lords, Lady of Lords.
yeah. And then he couldn't remember the rest. In the same press conference, he referred to the president of Egypt as the president of Mexico. No, I don't think he's helping himself and attacking the press for asking questions about his ability. That's not going to work either. So
Right.
notice when he was
Go ahead.
asked by a reporter about whether he had memory loss, he kept saying, "Well, that's your opinion. That's not the opinion of the press." Well, how can you speak to what the opinion of the press is? The American people, I saw a survey this morning, some 87% raised questions about whether he's too old to be president. A different poll had that at 72. Either way, it's well over 50%. I think he has deep political problems.
Yeah, and I want to know the 28% that think he doesn't have cognitive problems. I mean, how could they possibly be that blind? How do the Democratic people? I'm always when I say to them, that they're going to support Joe Biden and President Joe Biden. I always show respect for the office, but give me one good reason to vote for him. I really want to know sincerely. And of course, they walk away or they curse you out or whatever. What do you think this Trump derangement syndrome effect that's happening to people that actually think Joe Biden is doing a decent job? How could they
Actually, no, actually, I think virtually no one thinks he's doing a decent job. I honestly think that most of those people who are still voting for him are voting for him because he is not Donald Trump. They have a visceral hatred for Donald Trump. They don't like his style. They don't like his bluntness. They don't like his America first, whatever it may be. Trump is what he is. He's authentic. He's
Yep.
genuine. His comments are heartfelt.
Mhm.
He's not always certainly not always politically correct. He says what he really thinks.
I love that about him.
And some people really despise that. Also, he doesn't fit the uniparty narrative. In other words, look, I have great sentimental attachment to the Republican Party of Lincoln, the party of Eisenhower, the party of obviously of Nixon, Reagan, and Trump. But I also am under no illusions. Trump is uncontrollable, not by the party, not by the special interests, not by the status quo. And above all, they don't want a president who is uncontrollable. If you watched the epic interview between Tucker Carlson and Vladimir Putin, Putin brought up multiple times where the president of the United States told him the U.S. was going to do one thing, but then the bureaucrats and the others around the president would undo that. He brought it up multiple times in his agreement. He kept saying, "I had an excellent personal relationship with the Bushes, but they made certain representations to me and then they did not fulfill them." So I really think it's the uncontrollable nature of Trump that they hate, and the country is very sadly, as you know, extremely polarized.
Yeah.
Uh, Donald Trump is very polarizing. You either love him or you hate him. Well, I love him.
Me too. I fall along the same lines of loving him. I always call him the bull in the china shop, and we need a bull in the china shop right now. We need to shake it up, and he's proven to do that. And I got to give him credit because, man, does he like to fight? I mean, he just loves it. Thank God he's got the personality that he's got, that he just keeps pushing through this. Because we had a conversation 2.5 years ago where we're both kind of questioning whether he's going to run or not, and it's like, wow, he really just went for it. I wanted to say one more thing before we end this interview, and I appreciate your time. Um, is you've recently come to Christ, haven't you?
Yes, well, not recently. Actually, this was now 3 years ago.
Wow.
When I was charged by Robert Mueller, despite the fact that I did nothing wrong. Remember, they charged me with lying under oath to Congress in my voluntary testimony regarding Russian collusion that we now know definitively actually never took place.
Right.
It was a very cleverly constructed process crime, which they used to relentlessly try to pressure me into testifying falsely against Donald Trump, which of course I refused to do. So I went through a period of depression and anger and frustration. And it was then that, based on some very solid advice that I got from Reverend Franklin Graham, who I had an opportunity to meet,
Hmm.
that I was redeemed in the blood of the cross, and I renewed my commitment to Christ. I changed the way I thought and the way I lived, and I put all of my faith in the Lord. And it's why I think Trump pardoned me. The Lord answered my prayers and the prayers of those in my family in that regard. It's still annoying to me that elites at the New York Times and CNN and MSNBC they laugh about this. They mock you if you say you believe in Christ, as if it's some kind of head fake or some kind of
Amen.
pose.
Yep.
What they don't understand is you can't fool God. You can't fool the Lord. The Lord knows what's in your heart. He knows whether you're sincere or when you're not, and therefore it is my faith that guides me. It is the faith that sustains me. I've been through some horrific battles. I suspect there are still horrific battles to come to save this country. But I'm proud of my redemption. I'm not embarrassed about it. I actually talk about it at every opportunity that I have.
Well, you're my fellow brother in Christ. I'm very grateful that I'm among your family, and I've got a great deal of respect for you. I mean, we could go on about the FBI and CNN and the persecution, but it's true. Within persecution, God uses everything like that to bring us to Him. So yours was just a lot more wild than most people. I mean, you know, it's amazing that you've been in a relationship as long as you have with President Trump, a long-standing relationship, and you're a fighter like he is, and I got a great deal of respect for you. Roger, is there anything else you want to share with my audience before we
Uh,
close?
yeah, you can follow me, folks, if you're interested by going to stonezone.com, stonezone.com. Now, there's several things going on there. You can see my daily show, which is called The Stone Zone, which appears on Rumble, as well as a number of other platforms. You can also hear my weekend radio show, which is at wabcradio.com. That's every Sunday from 4 to 6 Eastern. You can read some of the print journalism that I myself have written, or I actually also curate important stories that I think people are not seeing that they need to see. So, and it's free. So please go to stonezone.com and subscribe today. Also, you can visit the store there. I have written 5 bestsellers, 2 New York Times bestsellers, The Man Who Killed Kennedy, The Case Against LBJ, about the Kennedy assassination, The Bush crime family, exposing Jeb and George and George W. Bush Sr. I've also written The Clintons' War on Women, which is the definitive book on the criminality of the Clintons, and also, by the way, the first major book in the United States to tell us about Jeffrey Epstein. It's the longest chapter in my book, The Clintons' War on Women, is an expose of Epstein written in 2015, including, by the way, the FAA manifests for his plane, the Lolita Express. So I was one of the first Americans to expose Epstein. It got no coverage in the national press when I wrote it, but it's there for all to see.
Yeah, and just thank you for what you do. Thank you for your powerful witness, guys. The stonezone.com is down there, so you can read it down there. I'm going to put a link in the description. I'll do whatever I can to support this man. Roger, we thank you so much for your dedication, for your concern for our country, and for what you do.
Well, I
So
appreciate that. In the meantime, take care of that cowboy hat. It looks great.
it's kind of my trademark. Thank you, Roger. And thank you for watching. We appreciate all of you. God bless. And this is Roger Stone on Mustang Medic. We're very grateful to him. Thank you. Thank you for watching.